Yeah, so no, we're so grateful to have you here. I'm going to read a little of your bio because I don't want to get it wrong, but I've worked with you for so long and you're doing so much work in happiness and stress, and you're the perfect person to talk to at the World Happiness Agora and about global happiness and how to create more of it in our lives. So really grateful for you to be here. So you're a PhD in clinical psychologist. And I love that Shaq O'Neal calls you his head coach for happiness.
Got a big head.
Right? I know. Yes. So that's awesome. You have a TEDx talk, The Science of Happiness, which we'll put in the chat box if people want to watch it. And the author of The Happy You, Your Ultimate Prescription for Happiness. So that's amazing. Yes, and then you've been on just pretty much every talk show and, the Today Show and the Dr. Oz, the Steve Harvey Show, CNN. You've been in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Better Home and Gardens, and your new work is really interesting too, working with high-profile celebrities, high-performing executives, and about raising purpose-driven children, which is so important. And so, having purpose is so important to happiness. And so having these people raise purpose-driven children is a really, great mission and great thing for you to take on. Really important. So, so super grateful to have you here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
And I'm going to kind of give you the floor to let you talk to the people, everyone about happiness.
All right, so again, I'm Elizabeth Lombardo. People call me Dr. E, and I get to talk to you about the habit of happiness, which kind of sounds not so pleasant, but this is a habit that we are going to enjoy, like brushing your teeth, right? You're happy when you brush your teeth. I assure you the people around you are happy when you brush your teeth. So let's think of it as one of those kinds of habits that just helps you and the people around you. So before I start talking about that, I want to share with you a little bit about how I came to be fascinated really with happiness. I think we all want to be happier, right? That's I think kind of our goal in life. If you ask someone, hey, if you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for? Whatever they would wish for, whether it's more money or, better health or travel or love, whatever it is, the ultimate reason for their wishes is to bring happiness and fulfillment to your life. So, I think it's something that we all strive for, we all want. Personally, I became really fascinated with the concept of happiness when I was doing my postdoctoral training in psychology. So I was at a big medical center in Dallas, Texas, actually the same one that Kennedy was brought to after he was shot. And so it was a major medical center, major trauma. And as a psychologist, I would work with individuals and families who were going through tough times, whether it was an accident or shootings, that kind of stuff. Tough issues. I was there to support the individual, the client, as well as the family going through it. And I remember distinctly receiving a consult telling me who my next client was. And it said that it was a gentleman, and it said, status post bilateral upper extremity amputation, which is just a very mouthy way to say both of his arms were gone. They had been cut off. So the story was, this was an electrician. He was in his early 40s, and he had been an electrician for like 2 decades, and he'd been working on a wire that was supposed to be inactive. Unfortunately, it was quite active, and so he had an electrical current go through his body that burned him so severely that the doctors gave his wife 2 options. We can amputate his arms and keep him alive, or he will die. Definitely not, a question you want to be posed, right? So of course she wanted to save her husband, so they surgically removed both of his arms, and I was the psychologist who was supposed to help him and his wife get through this. Now, this was early on in my career, so, I got to tell you, though, I distinctly remember I'm wearing my white coat, trying to look all official. I don't look so young anymore, but throughout my life, I always looked younger, so I was always trying to look older so that they weren't like, who's this kid trying to help us out? So there I was, standing at the hospital room door with my white coat on. I had my clipboard trying to look all official, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do with this guy? right? Obviously he's depressed. Obviously he feels hopeless and helpless and worthless. Like, what am I going to do? Now, granted, this is not what you want your shrink to be thinking, but early in my career, so that's where I was. And I opened the door, and there was Roger. He's a very tall man, probably like 6'4", big head of brown hair. He was wearing that horrible, hospital gown, like bluish, grayish. Like, I don't know why they have to have such a horrible color. Why can't it be bright pink? I don't know. Anyway, he was wearing the hospital gown, and he had no arms, and he was smiling. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, this guy is delusional. Like, not only do I have to deal with his depression, help him deal with his depression and helplessness, but he's like, he doesn't even realize he lost his arms. But of course he did know that he lost his arms. And I was the one who's delusional because I thought I knew exactly what this guy was going through. And I didn't know anything this guy was going through, because here's the deal. Roger was happy. Was he happy he lost his arms? Well, not necessarily, but he was very happy to be on Earth. The way that he interpreted what happened was, I was left here on Earth for a specific reason, for a real meaning, for a purpose. And it is my goal to figure out what that purpose is and to fulfill it. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know that I would have had that perspective. I don't even know that I'd have that perspective now. I would like to think that I would, but I definitely wouldn't have had that perspective back then. And I remember thinking, I just gotten my PhD. I just gotten married to the love of my life. We were doing okay financially. Life was pretty good. And I remember thinking, I want to be that happy. Like, how can I be that happy? And, I knew the research that showed that happiness is pretty consistent, right? So people think, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? Well, losing both your arms is pretty tough. A spinal cord injury, a lot of times people say. And we see in the research that people's happiness, it might dip initially after a spinal cord injury, but within about 6 months, it goes right back to where it was before. Now, what's the best thing that could happen to you? Well, some people would say, if I won the lottery, if I had millions of dollars, then my life would be great and I'd be happy. But what we find is there's an increase in happiness for about 6 months, and then it goes back to where you were before. So happiness really is, we're calling it a habit. It's a trait. It's a steady, consistent way of viewing the world and your life. And I remember thinking, if Roger could be this happy, could I be this happy? And equally as important, could I help other people be as happy? And that's when I really started on my happiness journey. And I think one of the keys as we talk about happiness is to think about what happiness is and what it's not, right? So happiness is not laughing and being giddy and gay all the time, right? It's really, I always say that's being stoned, and that's not what we're looking at here, right? But it's really, it's having a sense of purpose. It's having meaning. It's having a mood that's more positive than not, in a way that isn't hedonic, meaning more chocolate chip cookies, more buying, more shopping, that kind of thing, but that's really fulfilling in your soul. And when we talk about happiness, it's again, it's not what's happening on the outside. I mean, here Roger lost both of his arms, but he was still happy on the inside. So happiness is really, it's an inside job. And I think we've all heard that. And yet I think a lot of us still get on that, what I call happiness treadmill. I'll be happier when. I'll be happier when I lose weight. I'll be happier when I get married. I'll be happier when I get divorced. I'll be happier when I get the job. People think that these external events are going to bring them more happiness. And it's almost like being on a treadmill, because once you achieve it, you may feel good for a while, but then it's what's next, what's next, what's next. And the research actually shows that this notion of I'll be happier when is exactly the opposite. Right? It's not that external events bring us happiness, but really happiness is the precursor to a lot of external events, right? So happiness impacts us in a lot of different ways. So obviously when we're happier, we have a better mood, right? We have less stress. We experience less stress. We're more resilient. But our brain actually operates differently when we're happier versus when we're stressed out. Right. And so when we're happier, we're better able to use our rational thinking, problem solving, figuring out, okay, here's a problem. If we're stressed out, we're like, oh, we're stuck. But if we're kind of in a happier state, we're more optimistic. We're more in that problem solving. How can I make this better? When we experience happiness, we tend to experience more gratitude. And gratitude is probably, if you're going to do one thing when it came to happiness, and we're going to talk about this later, it would be experiencing gratitude. But what we find in the research is that gratitude, experiencing gratitude, having that feeling of appreciation, literally alters the chemistry of your brain. And the stress centers in your brain reduce their activity when you're experiencing gratitude. But let's look not only at psychologically how happiness can impact us, but also how it can impact other facets of your life. So for example, health. Health is, there's something, a field of research called psychoneuroimmunology, which is a big old mouthful, just saying that psychology, psycho, not crazy, but psychology, and neurology and immunology, so our nervous system, right, our muscles and our nerves, the nerves innervate muscles. Okay, don't be geeky, Elizabeth. But our nerves and our immune system, which fights off infection, they're all related. So when you are stressed out, not just for a short term, but on a long-term basis, your body actually can't fight off disease as well. And we know that people who are stressed out tend to get sicker, right? Because sickness is caused by or made worse by 90% of illness is caused by or made worse by stress. So when you are happier, your body is healthier. And in fact, happier people live 8 to 10 years longer. So it impacts our psychological functioning, it impacts our physical health, it impacts our relationships. I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed out and unhappy, I'm not very pleasant, right? And you know, we tend to take it out, not necessarily on strangers, but on the people closest to us, right? At least I do. I don't know about you. So it impacts our relationships. It impacts our work. Research shows that happier employees have an increase in sales by 27%. Just stop for a second. If you are in any sales position or you work at any kind of company where sales occurs, and by the way, if you're a parent, you're in sales, if you know what I mean, 27% increase in sales and 20% increase in productivity for happier employees. What would that mean to your life? It's pretty significant. So there's a reason why happiness is so important. It's not just, oh, isn't that great? You know, you can smile more. It really impacts every facet of our life. And when we are happier, our inner critic, that sound inside of our head that's judging us, that's telling us we're not good enough, we all have one, our inner critic isn't so loud. And what we want to remember is what goes on up here impacts everything that goes on out there. If I'm constantly judging myself and putting myself down, unfortunately, I'm doing the same with the people around me, right? And that can be with family and friends, but it also can be people who are different from us. But when we're happier, we can see other people's perspectives better. And so happiness really is a cornerstone to, in my opinion, making this world an even better place, a healthier place, but also a more accepting place. So I hope you can see why happiness is so important. And what I want to make sure that you understand is that happiness is a skill. You know, I do a lot of interviews on happiness, and one of the questions people love to ask me is, well, isn't happiness a choice, Elizabeth? Well, it's a choice, but you have to know how to do it. You know, most of our society is practicing happiness in all the wrong ways, right? Thinking, oh, if I buy more stuff, if I look a certain way, if only my husband was more supportive, then I'd be happier. But again, we see it's actually the opposite. And so what we want to understand is that when we learn how to be happier, the actual skills of happiness, then we actually all can be happier. Every time you have a thought in your mind, your nerves fire in a certain pattern, right? So if you think, oh, it's going to be a bad day, your nerves in your brain are firing a certain way, right? If I think it's going to be a great day, different nerves are firing in my brain. It's the same thing with behaviors, right? In order for me to be, by the way, I became Italian about 17 years ago. So I'm a little talking with my hands, Lombardo. Got it. Yeah. So anyway, but in order for me to move my hand, there's certain nerves that are firing in my brain to allow that to happen. And there's this concept called neuroplasticity. Neuro just means your nerves. Plasticity means it can change. And what we're finding is that using the skills of happiness can actually promote neuroplasticity, meaning when you practice the skills of happiness on a consistent basis, you literally change your brain for the positive. Now, think about the first time, or maybe you drove a car. If you're anything like me, you're like, oh, where do my hands go, right? How much do I turn the steering wheel? How much pressure do I apply to the accelerator and the brake? It's very cognitively consuming, right? Because you're constantly thinking like, oh my gosh, is this the right way to do it? Do I put the signal on now? Now, though, when you get in the car, my guess is you're more focused on what song is on the radio or maybe who you're talking to on your earpiece than actually driving. And if you don't drive, same thing with riding a bike, same thing with walking. You did not come out of your mama's womb being able to walk or being able to drive. You learned that. And now it's become automatic. Well, just like behaviors, thoughts and beliefs can become automatic if we train our brain to do it. So if I said to you, if you're in the US, if I said to you ABC, what would you think in your mind if we could stick a microphone in it? You'd probably be singing A, B, C, D, right? You go right into the ABC song. Now, again, you didn't come out of your mama's womb being able to sing that, but it's so ingrained in your brain that that's the pathway your brain takes. So how can you change your brain? How can you start to apply the skills of happiness in order for it to be your more, what I would say, go-to reaction? Well, one of the ways, and there are literally countless ways, but one of the ways that I wanted to talk about with you today is something that I call the happiness challenge. The happiness challenge. The happiness challenge is, I know there are questions, and I'm going to try to go back. Okay, I'll read this later, and maybe Catherine and I will talk about it. I'm sorry, I'm not coordinated enough to be talking to you and reading questions and answering them. I'm sorry. The happiness challenge. Okay, so what is the happiness challenge? The happiness challenge is actually something I talk about in A Happy You, Your Ultimate Prescription for Happiness. And it goes something like this. I want you to think about an area in your life that tends to bring you stress. Maybe it's driving in traffic, or maybe it's dealing with a particular individual in your life that you wish you didn't have to, but you have to, you know what I'm talking about? Or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe you're not a morning person. I am obnoxiously a morning person. I am not a night person, but I am obnoxiously a morning person. But maybe for you, it's getting up in the morning. It's, whatever it is, think about an event that tends to cause you stress. Some of you are like, I have many of them. That's fine. That's fine. Just choose one. Now, think about 3 things you can appreciate about that event. So let's say you drive to work and you get stuck in traffic and it takes you, twice as long as maybe it could because there's so much traffic. Elizabeth, what could possibly be positive about that? Okay, well, let's look at that. 1, you're safe in your car, right? That's a positive. 2, you have a job to go to. A lot of people don't. 3, this is an opportunity to listen to an audiobook. I'm completely addicted to audiobooks, by the way. 4, I only said 3, but I'm going to throw out some other ones. Maybe you have a family like I do. When my teenagers get in the car, I have no control over the radio. But when I'm alone and stuck in traffic, I have complete control over what song I listen to. Maybe for you, when you're stuck in traffic, it's a great opportunity to hands-free, because we want to make sure you're safe driving, but to call a friend or a family member who you haven't talked to in a while, right? So the premise of the happiness challenge is not to deny that it's kind of lousy to be stuck in traffic. That may be true, but what are 3 things you can be grateful for right then and there? And when you start to prime your brain to look at what's right as opposed to what's wrong, what happens is your brain starts to look for that not only when you're challenging it with the happiness challenge, but overall in life. Because again, that notion of happiness is really, it's finding meaning and purpose. What's important to you? And how much are you applying that in your life? There was a study several years ago that asked, it just happened to be with nurses, and they asked the nurses to document, I think it was every 5 or 10 minutes, what they were doing. They had to write down what they were doing. So sometimes it was at work, sometimes it was in their personal life, but they had to document what they were doing. And this study was supposed to go on for several weeks. They had to stop it early, much earlier, because the nurses started to become depressed or feeling very sad. Why were they sad? Because they realized that how they spend their time was not consistent with what brought them meaning. right? What their values are with their family, their friends, and really connecting with their loved ones. There wasn't that consistency. Now, some people may say, okay, Elizabeth, that's great. I know being with family is important. I know, for example, helping out others, giving to others. I know that's important, but I don't have time. I respect that. In our society, time is a very precious commodity. But this is where, and if you were on the video when we started, Catherine was talking about some issues, technical issues that had occurred. And I said, well, it's better than perfect. And this is this concept of better than perfect. I also wrote a book called Better Than Perfect. And better than perfect is this notion that when things don't go perfectly, instead of getting upset about it, you say it's better than perfect. But it's the same thing when it comes to applying our values, our strengths, really looking at what's important in our lives. So if you were to identify what's most important to you in your life, it may be health, it may be love, your family, your friends, compassion. I don't know what it is. But when you really look at what values and characteristics are most important to you, you want to make sure you're applying them. But you don't have to, if compassion is one of your core characteristics and values that's really important to you, you don't have to move to Africa and build water wells for 3 months, right? Literally looking at the barista when you're getting your coffee and saying, thank you. That's compassion. So really looking at not making it the perfect way, but this notion of being better than perfect. How can you apply gratitude? How can you apply compassion? How can you connect with your loved ones on a deeper level in a way that really does work for your schedule? Even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's 10 seconds, taking that time for you to cultivate your happiness is going to help you make it a habit and also be able to spread it with other people. The research shows that when an individual is happier, not only are their friends and family happier, but their friends and families are happier, right? So it really impacts all the people around you. And you can become that pebble in the water, right? To kind of, if you start to apply these habits of happiness, these skills of happiness, and you start to really change your brain so that you start to see more positive, so that you start to experience more gratitude, so that you start to connect with others on a deeper level. When you start to do that, not only will it help you be happier, but it's going to help your friends, it's going to help your family, and it's going to help their friends. So it's a very powerful way to help yourself be happier.
No, that's great. That's so helpful. And you are just a happiness expert. I love how you come at it from all different angles. And the 6 month thing, it's, something happens and we're all excited, but we go back to that state. So how do we kind of build that muscle? So one question that I loved, and this is so true. So why is it that if we know all these things that make us happy, why don't we do it?
Yes, why don't we? Well, let me ask you a question before I answer that. How many of you out there know that it's important to exercise regularly and to get the sleep, that you need, and to eat healthy foods? Like, we all know that, right? It's not laziness. It's that you are prioritizing something else. And a lot of times people will prioritize the way that they've been. I never forget, I had a client once who he was in his 60s, and he was and I would say it to him, so I feel comfortable saying it to you all. He was a curmudgeon. I mean, he was just like, if there was it was sunny out, it was too sunny, right? If it was raining out, it was wet. You know what I mean? Like, he was only going to find the negative. And I remember him talking to me, and he kind of came in to see me like, what are you going to do? And I remember him saying, I've been like this my whole life. So over 60 years, you can't change me. That's all I need. I just need that little. So within 4 sessions, he was really starting to realize, wait a minute, this is important stuff. So I think a lot of times people are like, well, I've always been like this. Again, neuroplasticity. You did not come out of your mama's womb thinking I can't do this, thinking life sucks. You didn't. That was learned. Mm-hmm. And even though there may be some biological stuff going on there, our thoughts can overpower that. Our behaviors and habits can overpower that. So it's, instead of thinking it can't happen, this is the way I've always been, my life's tough, say, what if it could? And then just give it a try. And when you maybe start a gratitude journal and you write in it a couple of days, and then you forget for a couple of days. Well, don't say, oh, forget it, I can't do it. Say, I always say it's not failure, it's data. Okay, cool. Why didn't I do it for the past couple of days? Oh, because it was hidden over there. If I put it right next to my bed, that will allow me to do it. And make it a game of how can you apply these happiness habits into your life.
Yeah. And I think too, we have to repeat them. So it's not enough to just do like we worked on a happiness course together. It's 21 days. It's because every day you have to build on it to really make it a habit. You have to do it over a certain amount of time. It's like working out. You have to keep doing it.
That's it. You said the happiness muscle, and it really is that concept. In my old life, I'm a physical therapist and I taught group fitness for 20 years. And it is that notion. You know what? I'm going to just say a little something about me teaching group fitness for 20 years. When I was in high school, I hated exercise, hated it. And I remember going to college and thinking, I got to exercise because I don't want to do the freshman 15 and I'm going to like it. And so I literally rewired my brain. And now, I taught for 20 years and loved it. I exercise almost every day and I like it. I'm sorry, but it's not because I'm weird or crazy and I was not born that way. It's because I changed my brain. Anything can change. Our perspectives, our habits, anything can change.